Okay, it is 2 o'clock, so we are going to get started with today's Leading Patriots webinar. My name is Brett Josephson. I'm an associate professor of marketing in the School of Business. I'm the director of executive development. I do want to thank everyone for joining this panel today. I'm really excited to get into a topic that we've just seen in industry with a significant amount of disruption right now. And we're going to be focused on hospitality, tourism, and then what's going on and how they relate to the gig economy. A little bit about just our schedule today. I'm very excited that I'm going to be joined and have the panel moderated by Gina Woodall, who is the Associate Vice President for Marketing in the university, not the School of Business, in George Mason University. We're going to have conversation around this idea of hospitality, tourism, and the gig economy with three unbelievable Mason panelists. We're going to get to some introductions, but just want to thank, right up from the top, thank Terri, Gina, and Lauren for joining us today. If you do, for the audience, we want to make sure that you have an ability to ask questions. As Eric is facilitating the conversation with the panel, I will be monitoring the Q&A in Zoom and chat feature in Zoom. So if you have questions of our panelists talking about this industry, make sure that you're submitting them either through that Q&A feature or through the chat feature.
All right, thanks very much, Brett. Thanks everybody for joining today. I'm going to do I'm sorry, Brett, I think you're going to talk about the Alumni Association. I jumped in too soon, I got too excited.
Yeah, so let me at least talk a little bit. I was looking through the registration list. I know some of you have come back for a couple webinars. For others, this might be your first one. The idea of this Leading Patriots series was a partnership born out of the Alumni Association and executive development. And it was to highlight specific alumni within the university whose industries and whose companies are going through an enormous challenge and disruption right now due to the pandemic and due to other things that are happening in the environment. And so what we want to do is create a series that highlighted what our leading patriots were doing and to give them a platform to demonstrate and provide best case scenarios or provide best use cases on how they are leading their organizations and their industries moving forward. This really is a unique partnership that has been born out of the Alumni Association to bring people from across the university and who are alumni from multiple units on campus. And so with that, I would encourage everyone, if you are a participant, to get involved with the Alumni Association at George Mason University. One of their main tagline, which I'm a firm believer in, is the idea of once a patriot, always a patriot. And the Alumni Association is here to provide opportunities, to provide benefits to you once you've left Mason, throughout your career and throughout your remaining time, to be engaged with the university, come back for networking and career resources so that they can be with you and to be a resource as you move forward. With that, I will turn it over to Eric.
That sounds great. Thanks a lot, Brett. And thanks everybody for joining. I'm going to do a quick introduction of our panelists today. We'd like to thank them, all three of them, for joining. Terri Beirne is the Eastern Counsel for the Wine Institute. She is a 1988 graduate from Mason. She represents the Eastern Seaboard for the Wine Institute and has been an appointee for the George Mason Board of Visitors and is now on the George Mason University Foundation Board. So Terri, thank you very much for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
Gina Woodall. Yes, we are related. Gina's my wife, and she is the president of Rockbridge Associates, a marketing research firm headquartered in Great Falls, Virginia. They do strategic marketing research and marketing counsel for their clients, and they've done a significant amount of work around the travel industry. You can see in her bio some of the largest names in the travel industry. They have done some really great research for. I'd like to thank Gina for joining us from separate parts of our household today.
Happy to be here.
And Laura Alba. Laura is a 06 grad from Mason and is Senior Director for the leading hotels of the world in their global public relations strategy and is responsible for the media partnerships. Prior to joining Leading Hotels of the World, Lauren has held several other travel-related positions with American Express and also with Coin PR. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Communication, Go Communications, from Mason, and is headquartered in New Jersey. So Lauren, thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time.
Of course, thanks for having me.
What we'd like to do is we'd like to start out with an overview of some of the data that we have, and I'm going to toss this over to Gina to talk a little bit about the state of the industry. As Brett led in, we know that there's been significant, not only financial, but operational disruption in travel and hospitality, and some of those numbers that we're seeing now. So I'm going to toss it over to Gina so she can guide us through this.
Great, thanks, Eric. Yeah, I think everyone knows who's been reading the news and watching what's been going on the past several months. Obviously, the travel sector has taken quite a hit, and some of this data here from the American Hotel and Lodging Association kind of brings that home for us, where we see leisure and hospitality as kind of the top industry with the largest 1-month net decline in payrolls amid this crisis that we're seeing with the virus. And on the next slide, my company, Rockbridge Associates, again, we're a marketing research firm. We conducted a survey. This was in mid to late March 16th through 24th. So the virus had kind of, really started to take its toll. There were a lot of stay-at-home orders beginning then. And what we wanted to understand was kind of what was the impact on consumers in terms of their travel plans. And these were travel plans that had already been made, so that they were either planning or they'd actually made reservations and things. And what we saw was, when we kind of rolled all the numbers up, is that overall it's a $106 billion hit to travel in travel expenditures that have been canceled or postponed due to the virus. And you can see kind of how that breaks out. It affects all aspects of the travel industry, from airfare to all paid lodging. Paid lodging includes both hotels and rental properties, the cruises and everyone else, as you can see there. Then on the next slide, there's just a little more detail on this. We know overall, 43% of consumers said that they had canceled or postponed their travel. And we're counting travel as trips that are out of town or involve paid overnight accommodations. And you can see, for some people, it wasn't just one trip, but multiple trips that they were canceling. And on average, it was a 4.7 night stay that they were canceling. So you can see really that the impact was great across the industry, and it's definitely costing. So we're excited to hopefully now see the other side of it and begin the recovery.
Great, thanks very much. The data really points to, obviously, what we've seen in news stories and really anecdotally, is that it's an incredible financial hit to the travel and tourism industry. I guess I'll start with Terri. If you could talk about some of the disruption that you saw in the wine industry specifically, that you've really had to react to on a almost on a basis that a time basis that is unheard of in the industry itself.
We have I represent the California industry, which is responsible for about 80% of domestic production, but we work all over the country, and I used to lobby in Virginia and work for the Virginia industry, so I have a perspective on both the large industry and the small one. But there's 10,000 wineries in the United States today, and 4,000 of them are in California, and there are wineries in every other state in the country. So the impact is very different on the different sized wineries, but generally in California, the tasting rooms where the bulk of their sales happen were shut down on March 16th, I think it was, March 16th. And they just now are going to be, we found out this week, the governor is going to allow them to reopen as of the 12th, no earlier than the 12th. So complete shutdown of a significant channel for our business. And then, as mentioned before, the hospitality industry, the restaurants shut down basically initially, and started to allow some sales again by the glass to go, maybe by the bottle to go in some states, but significantly less volume than it would have been if the restaurants were open. And then conversely, the on-premises sales, the channels, the grocery stores went through the roof. They're up 10% over last year's numbers, but not enough to compensate for the overall loss, but an immediate and dramatic change in all of the outlets for wine sales. The other, the direct-to-consumer channel, where people call the winery or go on the website and have wine shipped to them. We were fortunate to be that 46 states actually allow consumers to buy wine that way and have it shipped to their door already. And so that channel got a big bump, of course. So it's just been a complete reconnoitering of the way wine is sold in the United States, but generally down significantly because of the closure of the tasting room and the closures of the restaurants primarily.
Yeah, for sure. And I could imagine that there's also some of the tourism, especially in California, that was related to wine, obviously took a hit from that as well.
Absolutely. The 400 wineries in Napa Valley alone take 4 million visitors a year, and 3 months of the year shut down. That's a huge hit for the tourism industry.
Yeah. And Lauren, I think you bring a unique perspective in that you can talk a little bit about leading hotels of the world and how it will bring some of not just domestic, but also a global perspective to how the pandemic has hit your industry.
Yeah, so Leading Hotels has about 430 hotels globally. So we really started seeing it in January with our hotels in China, and then kind of on the as they started to actually reemerge and after their kind of restrictions, we started to kind of see this domino effect across our APAC hotels, and then Italy. So with the Italian kind of shutdown, Leading actually has over 60 hotels out of the 430 in Italy, and over 230 across Europe. So right away, as each one of the different countries kind of pose their different travel restrictions, and then the United States, which is for our hotels in Europe, their number one feeder market, as we imposed our kind of travel, our flight restrictions in March, we just saw kind of everything just kind of start falling off a cliff in terms of bookings, cancellations, and then ultimately leading to about 82% of our hotels at the peak of everything being shut down. And that was everywhere from hotels shutting down because they were mandated by the government, or just because of occupancy. They weren't able to keep their doors open. We do have, several hotels, some in the U.S. In California that have remained open and completely kind of started changing their business model. But now I'm happy to report with early recovery, we're really starting to see, hotels starting to reopen, and especially in Europe, we're holding on to June 15th when the travel restrictions in the EU start kind of lifting, and we'll start to see kind of regional movement. But yeah, it's had a significant disruption to our hotels, who are also, they're independent, family-owned hotels. So, this has had a significant impact on their businesses.
I can imagine. And I'd actually like to come back to the, a little bit later, we'll come back to the independent ownership nature of the hotels that you operate, because I think it's a really interesting point to try to dig into as we start thinking about recovery and what's going to happen next. So I'm glad you pointed that out. So short term, we had talked about some of the things that the wine industry had done, and Lauren, you had talked about some things in hospitality, but really specifically, when you're talking about changing your business models, how, when you're trying to recover some of the revenue loss, how did those industries get creative, and especially your partners get creative in trying to recoup some of that revenue? Terri, if you could go first.
Two specific ways. One thing that we've been doing, that my trade association has been doing on behalf of the industry, is checking in with all the regulators, because everything, as I used to tell my clients, but for guns and drugs, alcohol continues to be the most heavily regulated product in the United States. So you can't do anything unless an ABC agency says you can. And so we were checking in with all of them to ensure that virtual tastings would be allowed. And so the way it was envisioned was a smaller format bottle, not your traditional 750 ml, but smaller, which had to be approved by the ABCs, shipped a box of them to people's houses, and then those folks participated in a virtual tasting, either live or something that was taped in advance. So that was kind of a fun way to capitalize on some of the sales there. The other was, shoot, I was just going to tell you one other thing. Well, regardless.
I'm sure some of the regulations that you had to work around it also, did it loosen up some of the shipping to home as well? I mean, there are some states that it really,
unfortunately,
okay.
Not much. I mean, those states that allow it, those 46 states continue to allow it. It didn't allow for new changes on direct to consumer, but it did allow for significant changes on the cocktails to go. That was the other piece, the innovation, which happened often by executive order and not by legislation. Which the industry had been trying to get that legislation passed for years, and all of a sudden we've got executive orders that say you can now sell alcohol to go with an order of food from a restaurant. So that was a significant change that was not, that happened very quickly, even though it's something that industry had been trying to make happen for years.
And Lauren, I know we had talked a little bit about some of the changes that you had seen in your industry, but there were some pretty innovative things that you saw in your hotel specifically that I thought were really interesting.
Yeah, so since our hotels are independently owned and operated, you know, they have the flexibility to get a little bit more creative in terms of if they were open or as they are reopening, kind of rethinking the space that they have. So we have a hotel in California in Malibu Beach Inn that has never closed. But what they started to do was during the work week from 9 to 5, you could rent one of their suites overlooking the ocean, and you would have free Wi-Fi. There was lunch included that was delivered to your room. But they just got very creative about how to use their spaces and really reach out to the local community. To kind of provide that kind of WeWork space in their, using their hotels. And then looking at some of our hotels in Europe, we have a hotel in Vienna called the Sacravine, and they're family owned, multiple generations. And as they look to reopen, they started, or they actually launched this the end of May. They started these exclusive soccer sapares, which actually it was really interesting. What they did is that they looked back to their heritage and their history. And in the 19th century, one of the famous soccer family members, Anna Soccer, created these kind of very unique dining experiences connected to the hotel. So what they've done is they've used 152 of their suites that they have and turned them into private dining experiences that guests can book, or the locals could book for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 3 hours at a time. Very unique. Their suites are absolutely beautiful, and they turned these their rooms into mini pop-up restaurants, and they've been sold out since they've launched this. So hotels are definitely really thinking about their spaces, and even as they reopen, thinking about health and safety, how they're opening their occupancy. We have some hotels in Italy that are only going to open about 50% of their rooms. So they're thinking more about how do we do buyouts? How do we kind of think about our space that makes it more conducive for larger family travel? So it's really interesting to see, and they've been extremely creative in getting people into the doors and using their space in ways that previously they didn't have to think about doing.
Yeah, it's really amazing, especially when you have so much of your cost tied up in a physical asset like that, you have to try to think about how you're gonna reimagine how it's used. I love the dining idea. That's really amazing. So turning to the gig economy a little bit, I just want to be cognizant of time here and make sure we can get through our agenda for the day. Gina, I know you have some data that talking about how this has impacted the gig economy specifically and how it relates to the travel and hospitality industries.
Right. You know, and you may not think immediately about the gig economy being impacted, I guess, when we talk about travel and tourism, but if you think about the Airbnbs, the VRBOs, the Ubers, the Lyfts, you know, a lot of their revenue is coming from those that are traveling. In a study that we did in 2019, we measured that there's about 20 million adults who earn money from buying and selling products and services. Kind of, we call it the on-demand economy. And about a quarter of that really is around transportation and housing. So around those Uber and Lyft and Airbnb, VRBO types of businesses. So it's not as huge as you might think, but it does still have an impact if you think about those workers, those gig workers who from our research, really their main motivations are to get that extra income, in many cases to supplement other income that they're getting from full-time or part-time work, but also just the flexibility and control they have. So as you can imagine, there's no doubt that the industry has been severely impacted by the stay-at-home orders and not allowing them to really operate their businesses. But in terms of thinking about how they've kind of handled the whole this whole stay-at-home order time and just not being able to operate, I think one other thing that we've talked about, some innovative ways that the other aspects of the sector have kind of attempted to keep things moving. I think another piece of that is just being able to stay engaged with your market, your target market, and your audience. And I think, you know, Uber and Lyft, the way they're giving free rides to people, Uber Eats being able to waive fees for delivery, you know, really staying engaged with their audience and keeping that brand awareness up. Airbnb and VRBO, we know, have been working hard on their cleaning and sanitation protocols and just kind of educating homeowners so they're ready for that recovery. But I think that's a big part of it is right now we need our service providers to stay engaged with us so that, you know, as soon as everyone's ready to travel and get back into it, you know, you remember them and you move forward and you trust that they can provide the services in a safe manner as well.
Eric, I think your
Yeah,
sound.
All right, I'm sorry. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I think I got a call. So, so I think it's really intriguing. What I was saying is I think it's intriguing that we've seen a spike in VRBO because people are looking for a way to get out that they can still be safe, which kind of brings around a question for both Lauren and Terri about from a marketing perspective, how are you guiding your membership and how to actually market safety to consumers and what, you know, not just the protocols that you're taking, but really on a location by location basis. I imagine it's almost like doing regionalized marketing at that point.
I'll be happy to start. We actually, as an industry, everyone's been looking to the government to create these protocols for us. We're not. Wine Institute took on the initiative ourselves for the benefit of our members to come up with a 20-page guidebook on how to ensure that the tasting room portion of their facility is safe. Of course, you've got the whole production facility, which that portion of the wine industry has continued throughout the quarantining period because most of those are there's few people in the production facility and they're spaced far apart, or they're working out in the vineyard, and that's safe. And so, but for the tasting reopening portion piece, we've actually taken it on ourselves to create this set of protocols and very detailed things like, and the government has, the state of California specifically has required that the tastings that can happen starting this week actually have to happen outside. And they are associated with facilities that serve food. That was the first tier, is those people.
I think Terri might have frozen on us.
I think she froze.
Yeah. And Lauren, if you want to pick that up while
Sure.
Social gathering.
Is that
we lost you there for just a second, Terri. So
Okay, sorry.
no, it's
So
totally
anyway, we've taken it on ourselves to create this protocol for our membership. So, and we're using that to sell ourselves to the public to get them to come back.
Yeah, and I can jump in. We're doing, something very similar with leading, because we don't own or operate any of our hotels. They are independent. They look to us to kind of help them with these guidelines. So, there were some of our hotels that are in Europe. Some of the governments actually started to put together different accreditation and protocols that, by country they have to follow. But then we, Leading has partnered with kind of 3 different entities to support our members. So, from creating also a best practice guide, partnering with Remote MD and Pro Health Environmental and FEMA emergency response teams to kind of create a best practice guide that we gave to our hotels in May, as they started to think about what are some of these things that operationally we're going to need to change. And we held webinars with them as well. We also partnered with GBAC Star Accreditation, which is very well known in the industry. They work with stadiums and other large hotel brands to give us it's a certification that the hotels have to go through to prove that they have kind of reached these gold standards for cleanliness as they look to reopen. And then finally, we Leading every hotel goes through an 800-point kind of standards check. Every single year there is a mystery shopper that comes to the hotels and has to kind of go through all the different standards, and we as a brand, as a company, require them to receive above 85% of those standards. We've added in new standards that pertain to hygiene. So going forward, these are going to now be part of the overall standards that we are kind of viewing our hotels by, or holding our hotels to. So what we did as a marketing team is we took all these different things that we're doing from that our membership team is kind of spearheading, and we created this Healthy Stays commitment that we then have been putting out there to our guests, to travel agents, and also providing hotels with a toolkit on how they can leverage this kind of healthy stay commitment across their channels to really provide that kind of reassurance to guests as they're beginning to think about, where they're going to want to travel to next, and just making sure that, they're going to have a healthy and safe stay.
Yeah, and something that I would love to dig into more, if we had the time, is also talking about the reliance on other travel industries. So you're reliant on the air industry recovery, obviously, to make sure that you can get customers to your hotels, and the same for wineries and vineyards across the country and across the globe. So this really is such an interconnected type of situation that you find yourselves in, that the entire travel industry is going to have to help buoy itself in order to stage this recovery. Which kind of gets to the next point that we've talked about all the bad stuff that's happened and everything that all the disruption, but really in your minds, what does recovery look like?
you know, so knowing that you have some operating models that have changed, and even in some cases there are unfortunately those that have gone out of business. So how does your what does your operating model look like, and really what do you think recovery looks like in the coming year or 2 years?
I could start. So, I mean, the good news is that we are seeing kind of a very positive trends in terms of booking towards kind of Q3, Q4. Our hotels are kind of 5-star luxury hotels. So the luxury segment is a little bit different than some of the other travel segments. It tends to bounce back, if you will, a little bit faster because of kind of the way in which a luxury traveler travels and has the means to travel. So I mean, we're very, very hopeful that I don't think it's going to be exactly the same as you know. I don't know if kind of every hotel is going to be able to survive this. Some of these hotels are 14, 15 rooms all the way up to 500 rooms. So I think it's going to be it's definitely going to transform the industry. I think we were seeing kind of a lot of builds, a lot of new kind of inventory kind of coming into the market. I don't know how quickly that is going to continue, given that there's so many existing hotels out there. So I think the one big thing that I've noticed with our independent hotels we have a lot of older properties, kind of converted castles and monasteries and things. Something that they have been a little bit resistant to is kind of the introduction of technology into their hotels. So I think we're going to see definitely a lot more adoption of kind of the contactless ways, a lot more reliance on apps, a lot more reliance on things that I think that they were a little bit resistant to at first. So I think that is going to be for sure a huge transformation, particularly to my part of the industry.
Yeah, and I would definitely echo that. In some of the research that we've been doing, even as late as late March, we see across the contactless types of technologies, while usage has been low, like in the teens across hotels, airlines, car rentals, all, with the mobile apps, facial recognition at the airports, while usage before now has been quite low, the interest, very high interest in these technologies, we're talking in the 30s and 40%, who are highly interested in using these types of things to be able to limit their contact with, hotel keys, the lights and TV in their rooms, all those sorts of things to be able to just limit that contact. I think we see that as definitely something that is going to spur usage of that. We also know older consumers, based on our research, have not been as interested in those types of technologies, not ready to make that leap. But I think we would believe that these types of things, the pandemic might help spur that even more so, and kind of help with that recovery, I think, over time.
Yeah, I think with our hotels, it's balancing, because a lot of them, going back to the soccer, actually, one of their biggest things was when you checked into their hotel, you got an old key, like you have to return the key, and it was very much a part of their brand and the experience. And they have since actually moved to contactless key entry. So I mean, it's quite costly for these hotels, but I mean, I think there's definitely going to be I think a stronger push to move that way, and then trying to figure out how does that play within the story of some of these hotels that are older, and that was part of their charm, if you will.
Right.
And on the wine side, a lot of the changes that go forward are going to be behind the scenes. Consumers may not see a lot of them, but there's going to be a blurring of the lines of types of licenses, how and where you buy alcohol, and whether you can only buy wine and beer, or whether you can buy spirits. And that's been coming for a while, but I think this is going to hit it home. Going to a restaurant and what's the difference between wine, beer, and spirits? Although we know there's a difference in alcohol content, but I think the on-premises locations versus off-premises. I mean, what's the difference between going to a grocery store and buying a box of wine to go, or going to Outback and getting wine with your order? I mean, consumers are just not seeing that, and so the reliance on other people to deliver wine is a big deal. The third-party gig economy, if you will, and their capacity to deliver alcohol and check IDs and make sure you're not delivering to an intoxicated person. I think those laws are going to have to be firmed up. I think there's going to be a whole shaking out of the craft beverage industry nationally. I mean, there's 10,000 wineries, there's 7,000 breweries, there's 1,500 distilleries, and a lot of those are not sustainable business models. They either depend very heavily on consumers or entirely on direct shipments, and I think there's going to be that part of it alone. This has put a lot of pressure on an industry that was operating on pretty thin margins to begin with. So that'll be interesting to watch. Although the distillery folks, they had an interesting little gift from the federal government, and that they were allowed to stop producing alcohol if they wanted to start producing hand sanitizer. So a lot of them have been pulled into the front lines, if you will, and were using excess alcohol to make sanitizer. So they may get through this slump, if you will, but just kind of a shaking out of it, I think.
Yeah, and the hand sanitizer thing is something that's really interesting to me because, in fact, I saw in one of the stores over here, there's actually from the American Distillers Association, they're bottling spray hand sanitizer under the association name. So it's really interesting how you say, okay, we can't do one thing or we need to do another, and really the operations are about the same. A couple of additional ingredients and you're marketing a whole new product. So it's really been fascinating. So can I turn to Gina a little bit and talking about like how consumers are reacting to this and how their reactions are going to help spur the recovery, obviously, and not just what the travel and tourism industry is doing operationally. I don't know if you can have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think one thing that that I keep wondering about as we move further into the recovery, and I think this applies not just to travel and hospitality, tourism, but I think it applies across all service providers. We've seen it across industries. We do work in financial services and other areas, and I wonder if there's going to be kind of a dichotomy. You're going to have some consumers who are very nervous. They need to be reassured through tangible and intangible evidence that my service provider is doing everything they can to keep me safe as I travel or enter a bank or do anything. And then there's going to be others who have moved on. They don't see as much of a threat anymore. They want that high quality customer service and the real personal interaction that hospitality in particular provides them. And maybe you can't do that as well behind a mask, and they can't see, the people in the hotel smiling at them and welcoming them and don't feel as welcomed, with some of the protocols of the distance and things, and they're bothered by that. So I think it's something that it's going to be kind of a tightrope for, hotels and all of the industry to think about and walk on as we go by. And I think, doing research with your customers and understanding kind of where they stand and what they're thinking, what are their motivations and needs, because so much has changed during this pandemic, and people's values and what they're looking for, I think, has changed. So, and thinking about your messaging as marketers, how you approach that as the brand, welcoming those customers in so that you're sure you're kind of hitting the mark with them and really being relevant to their needs.
Yeah, and it seems to be applicable across industries too, because I mean, we've seen it in higher education, obviously. I mean, there's on-campus considerations that we need to make too. So in effect, you know, we're hoteling students for a certain period of time during the school year. So it's things that we have to take into consideration as well. So it's going to be really important to make sure that we're thinking about not just what you're doing and if you're doing enough, but also to make sure that you're communicating that out to your consumers and your constituents, and that everybody who's involved has that message so they can help reinforce that, right? So it's everyone from, you know, the hotels, it's the front desk to the cleaning staff to the concierge. So it's everyone who is involved helps reinforce that. So it really becomes almost part of your brand promise at that point, where you've had to reinvent that at the same time. I do want to remind everybody that if you have questions, I've seen a couple questions trickle in on the chat feature. So we're going to have, in about 10 minutes, we're going to open it up to some of the questions from the audience. We have one more topic that I'd like to get through here quickly. We kind of touched on the future a little bit, and we talked about some of the recovery efforts for the industry. But if you're looking, you know, even farther into the future, and you're thinking, okay, how do we either prepare ourselves better for if this were to happen again, right? So we continue to hear that there may be another spike coming in the fall after the reopening occurs, or if there are, do you feel better prepared now? Or you can also talk about some of the things that you're enacting within your own organizations, such as working groups to help make sure that everyone has the information that they need to talk about how you're enabling your membership in the future.
Do you want me to? I can start.
Yeah, that's fine, Laura.
So, I mean, we have been thinking a lot about it. I mean, at the same time, we're still in the middle of it. So it's, you know, it's a lot of, okay, how are we changing as a company? What are we doing? You know, how are we working together, and then better sharing information with our hotels? So, you know, I think the sharing the information and making sure everybody has a handle on what's going on has been very critical for us in the past couple of you know, month or so. We do kind of regional webinars, feeder market webinars on a weekly basis with our hotels to let them know, you know, here's kind of the state of what's happening in this country right now. Like, these are the events that happen. These are the travel restrictions that are happening, because it's happening so quickly. So I think one way that we've learned, and what we'll continue to do, is kind of really refined our crisis kind of planning, and how to really make sure that we are being open with what we're doing, and also arming our membership with as much information as possible, because they can't get it on their own. So by doing these regional webinars and kind of distilling all the information that's out there for them is one of our kind of key roles that we've has always been a part of leading, but something that is kind of more important than ever is just, there's so much information out there, distilling it for them, sharing with our hotels so that they can be better prepared as we move through kind of the different phases. And then if we have to shift back into kind of fully impacted again. We actually have created for the company our 3 phases, and created actions across all of our segments and what we're doing in each phase. So we have fully impacted, that's when everything is shut down. We have early recovery, which is what we're in now, when we're starting to see like easing of travel restrictions. And then finally we have kind of fully recovered, and it's kind of operating in this kind of new normal that we are in. But what's so challenging with this is that you can move back and forth between these different phases and in different countries. So I think, you know, it's being agile, it's being responsive, are kind of the words that our company kind of uses on a daily basis. We actually, as a marketing organization, do operate in agile. So we do operate in 2-week sprints. We do, it's completely transformed the way that I've ever operated as a marketer, but it's allowed us to be very responsive to what's happening.
And on the wine side, as I mentioned, we initiated our efforts to come up with our own protocols and shared them with the administration in California, and they endorsed them, and we've been sharing them with our membership. And so continuing to educate people on how they can go about their businesses more safely. Probably more direct-to-consumer engagement, connecting with our customers more proactively, either through virtual tastings or opportunities. I mean, everyone has a wine club already. Most wineries have that group of supporters, loyal supporters. And so figuring out how to engage more creatively and consistently with them. And then probably the memorializing some of the changes that have happened so quickly over the last 3 months, trying to change laws permanently to keep up with some of the drinks to go allowances and things like that, and making the business of producing and selling alcohol less complicated for wineries. And I think those are some of the things that are going to come out of it, and some of the things that we're going to continue to focus on. Yeah,
and I imagine with your association membership, having really taken the reins and not waited for guidance in some cases, and really taken charge of the situation, they're going to continue to turn to you as a leader in the industry, and really trying to provide them with some of the bellwether of what's coming, in addition to how they should be best prepared for this the second time around. I think the first time around, not disparaging to anyone on the webinar who sells insurance, but it's a bit like in selling an insurance policy where you're trying to insure against the disaster, and then you finally have the disaster hit, and now everybody realizes that it's something that they should have been doing before. So coming up with these types of plans and making sure that they're rock solid and can be enacted and are updated on a frequent basis is something that's going to be really important across industries. And then the last bit that I'd like to talk about before we get into any of the questions is we touched a little bit on technology. I know we talked about that. I didn't know if there were any additional thoughts on technology and how we see that as an enabler for recovery and growth. I realize a lot of technology is a significant capital investment, and when we're talking about some smaller operations, it can be a bit of a barrier. But kind of what are our thoughts on that? And Gina, actually, I'd like to hear some of your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I would just reiterate again, I do think technology is a way that can address some of the issues that we've been talking about. And it doesn't even, what I have been amazed about throughout the pandemic, we study innovation. It's part of our DNA at our company. We have worked with technology adoption, studied it since the early days when we started 25 years ago, really watched it. And what I have noticed during the pandemic is it doesn't even necessarily have to be true technology, but all the innovations that you all have been talking about, while not technological, they are innovations, and they show kind of that resiliency that, instead of doing wine and spirits, we're doing hand sanitizer, we're creating the suites with the dinners within, different hotel rooms, those are innovations. And I think those are the companies that will survive in the end of all of this, are the ones that could adapt and could take advantage of technology and innovation across the board.
I don't know, Lauren or Terri, if you had any additional thoughts on that.
I think, I feel like the hotel industry has kind of been a little bit notorious for being slow for tech adoption. So I completely agree. I think it was starting to move, and I think this is just going to kind of accelerate it. I'll also say for, as in marketing, again, I think, some of the smaller brands, just kind of marketing technology is something that as a company we've really invested in over the past few years, and our targeting capabilities. And I think right now we are very happy that we did, because being able to be, I think being relevant, highly relevant to any customer, I think is always important, but particularly right now, we have to be, because there's different restrictions everywhere, we have to be very careful about what we're marketing, and having kind of marketing technology through Marketing Cloud with Salesforce, or kind of other programs we use like Movable Ink for email, web recommendations, like we're being able to get to kind of that customer level, that you're able to present hotels and destinations that they actually can travel to and will be like wanting to travel to, is something that is, I think, even more important now than it was before, because how we're looking at our recovery efforts is of course very domestically, but then as you move from, especially in Europe, as you move from domestic, you're looking at kind of the countries maybe in the EU that people are going to start wanting to move in. So as they expand their travel circle, so being able to, build out different segmentation within Marketing Cloud to make sure that we're reaching those customers with the right hotels and right destinations is something that, we're doing a way more now than we were doing before.
And the wine industry generally is the same as it's been for millennia, and in terms of the way the product is produced and the way that it's sold, even in tasting rooms, probably. The biggest change probably will be, in most states in the country have a 3-tier system of alcohol sales, where wineries can only sell to wholesalers, who can only sell to retailers who sell to me&you, and those retailers are shops and restaurants. And that middle tier, the wholesale tier, is generally guys with trucks, and once we sell our product to them, they sell it to retailers, and we don't have any control over the product. We don't know what stores it's in and how much they're selling it for. And I mean, it's not a consignment arrangement, it's a true sale. And I think that middle tier is going to face a lot of changes, a lot of pressure to adapt to a newer way of doing business, and keeping track of sales better and more precise marketing. And you've got wine brands that are completely different. I mean, the way you would market a fancy brand in a steak restaurant like Silver Oak is totally different than how you would market a box wine in a grocery store. And having the data to know who's buying those products and through what channel they're buying them. I mean, I think data generally has been lacking in the wine business, at least from the producer perspective, for a long time. And so I think this will force the middle tier to make some investments in those kinds of resources that will benefit us as well.
Yeah, that's interesting, because you really do have a unique situation, especially from a marketing perspective, where you're so removed from the ultimate distribution of the product that it's hard for you to get that closed loop data that every marketer wants in order to be able to say, hey, I know exactly what worked and I know what I want to do again and again and again, right? So without having that change, that's a really interesting point. I do want to go, we have a couple questions that are in the queue here. Someone asked Lauren, how many hotels that you support have you had the chance to visit?
Actually, not as many as I would like. I actually had 3 hotel visits lined up that I had to postpone all of them. I have 2 little kids, so I had a 18-month-old when I joined Leading, and then I had another child while being here. I've been at Leading for almost 6 years. So my travel I've limited to, for work. And I will say every year, this actually will be the first year since the only other year since 9/11 that we're not having our annual gathering of all of our hoteliers. We normally have it in some different different continent every year. So it's brought me to Buenos Aires and Shanghai. Last year was in Marrakesh, and the hotel that we stayed in Marrakesh, the Royal Manceau, is owned by the king, and we had Riyadh. I mean, it was just something that, I've definitely been spoiled. So yeah, our hotels are fabulous, but the answer is not as many as I would like to have traveled to.
Yeah, I think that's always the answer. I one of the reasons why I'm moderating the group is that I did work for Hilton prior to coming to Mason, and you never get to as many properties as you say you're going to, and you never get to the ones you really want to go to.
Yeah.
So you're fortunate to have traveled that much. Gina, we do have a question for you. What type of research is next regarding the travel industry?
So I think one thing that we feel is important is that everyone take a step back and understand your customers again. I think we need to understand consumer motivations and needs and how they are changing to develop the strategies and tactics that you need to be successful. We're talking a lot about segmentation research, where you can really look in depth at your customers and see, because most likely they're not all the same and they're on different pages right now, and that you need to understand kind of where they sit and what's really going to motivate them to come back and continue spending on travel. I think that's one big thing, because I think that also influenced the most important thing, which is the messaging right now. And I think the messaging is moving from, we care, we've got your back, and now we want to get people traveling again. So what do we need to say to them to get them moving again and make it really, really hit home for them? So definitely segmentation, messaging work, and understanding those customers.
Yeah. We have a question. Actually, I think it's a really good question for both Terri and Lauren, which is advice for anyone in the industry who's experienced job loss due to COVID. Are there resources that you know of? Of course, the Alumni Association is a great one to get in touch with, but any other advice you have for someone who's experienced job loss?
The bulk of the wineries have done a pretty good job of keeping their employees, but the bulk of the losses have been in the hospitality industry, as you can imagine, in the restaurants. The folks, they're struggling. And in a weird twist of an example of these old outdated laws, manufacturers, wineries, have been unable to historically, because of what we call tied house laws, which means you can't have a manufacturer that's tied to a seller of alcohol, because back in the old days, the breweries used to, they would own like pubs in England is the system, where you've got a particular brewer that's tied to a particular outlet, and that's the only product that they sell. But to encourage diversity in sales and to keep the manufacturers from undue influence over the retailers, there's a legal distinction between the two. So we've actually not even been able to do things that support retailers' efforts to help their employees, except for some exceptions that we have been able to get in state law. So we're actually using money to help with scholarships and job loss efforts and grants and other things in like a bartender's funds and things like that. So our website, Wine Institute's website, actually has a list of resources for folks that are facing job loss and trying to get some support during this time in a way that we were not able to do in the past.
Yeah, in the hospitality industry, I know kind of in the early stages with a lot of the furloughs that were happening at the property level, a lot of the major brands were partnering with kind of the industries that were seeing a spike. So I can't remember if it was Hilton or Hyatt partnering with Walmart. So you saw a lot of, we have these great employees, we can't employ them at this time. And you need employees. Can you have them join your workforce? So there was a lot of that. I think also to your point, Terri, Leading is working on a new initiative for our independent hotels where it would enable our guests to kind of purchase a stay certificate, so like buy now, stay later, and that 100% of that purchase of that stay would go to support a a furloughed or a impacted employee on the property or at the property, or also they could donate to a local charity. So I think there's a lot of that happening in the industry as a whole as well.
Great. We do have one more quick question. Terri, can you share some information on George Mason wine?
Yay! I thought you'd never ask.
I held that one to last. It's the big close.
It's my opportunity for a shameless plug. So
Absolutely.
one of the projects that the foundation has been working on is the creation of the Geo Mason wine brand, with a label designed by students and a marketing plan created by another group of students. This is the Chardonnay. We've got a Chardonnay in a cab. They're for sale in Total Wines and other shops all around Northern Virginia. But there's a website that the wholesaler has, geomasonwines.com, I believe it is. You can do a search for Geo Mason Wines, and you can find out where to buy the wines in person or where to order them and have them shipped to your door for somewhere around $19.99. and the most important thing is $3.50 from the sale of every bottle goes to support George Mason University student scholarships.
That's great. So there you go. You got an opportunity to get your plug in.
Thank you.
Totally organic. I know we're at 3 o'clock. We do have one more question in the queue here that I'd like to get to quickly. Do you use social media and social media listening to understand your customers? And if you just quickly touch on that, that would be great.
Yeah, we do. We use Radian 6 Social Studio, which is part of the Sales Cloud suite of products. What's really interesting with our brand is that the discussion always tends to happen more at the property level versus kind of the brand level. So a lot of the discussion that we see is more about, their experience on property, which is not as related to us, but what we do is we work with the hotels to kind of give that information, and we provide them with tools through our guest satisfaction survey with Qualtrics that we work closely with, as well as a company called Revenate that also helps kind of monitor this stuff. So yes, we do as a brand, but it's more kind of in service to our hotels and what we're hearing, and can get back to them.
Yeah, and Terri, I don't know if you have any information on that for the wine industry or not. I'm assuming they do in some fashion.
I'm sorry, I missed the question completely.
The question was if you use social media monitoring. It's probably more a question. We could probably find out more information from individual wineries or something like that if someone's interested. But Lauren, I appreciate that information. We're at 3:02. This has been fantastic. I really appreciate everyone's time. I've had a great time moderating, and it's been great meeting folks. It's a great opportunity. Again, the Alumni Association, the Alumni Association, the Alumni Association. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Brett for having me moderate today, and having our panelists, and Jen Robinson at the Alumni Association for bringing us all together and helping to promote this series. The next one coming up is on Friday on sports, I believe. And Brett, I think you have the latest on that. Is that correct?
Yes, I think if we go to the next slide.
If it'll let me, I'd love to do that. There it is.
Right, yeah. So we have a series of we're coming out with this content in the leading Patriots sector. So, the idea of this, which was born out of Sumit Srivastava and I, who's the president-elect of the Alumni Association, focusing on, I think it was 12 industry segments. So encourage those of you who are still on the call, join us on Friday. We're going to be joined by the athletic director of George Mason University, individuals from Major League Soccer, from the Browns in the NFL, to talk about what is the future of athletics and what it looks like in recovery. And then next week, we really get into the topic that touches most of our lives, of their kind of personal wealth management and the financial situation for companies and individuals right now. Once again, I do want to thank everybody for joining us tonight, or for joining us this evening, this afternoon, whatever time of day it is. I can't seem to talk. I want to thank Eric for moderating it and being such a great host, and obviously Terri, Lauren, and Gina. Thank you so much for doing this, and can't wait. I definitely think we need to have another one. really focus even more on the wine industry. So absolutely.
I'm doing my part.
Right. Yeah, I've definitely increased part of those sales just myself. So once again, thank you all so much for this, and look forward to talking to you guys soon.
All right. Thanks again, Brett.
Bye.
Thank you.